What's up, guys? Shawnthebro here, back for another episode of the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. In this instance, you will see that we now are able to spawn up to 4 players, and even more, just with a 1 number tweak. We can change it to however many players we want to spawn on a map. And you can see that we have different spawn points that we set working in action. And lastly, you'll see that we have spots for the 4 players on the HUD. There is a reason that they are blank right now, and it's not because they're not set up. You will have them set up by the end of this video, but you will actually need to set the player characters from the player controllers to do this. And you can do it with AI as well, but if you are to do it this way, there is some more logic that goes into it, so I didn't want to cram too much into one video. This is already going to be a pretty long video, so I figured we could set it up for 4 players, and then in the next episode when we cover multiple player controllers anyway, we can go over setting the player characters so that all their HUDs spawn properly too. Okay guys, so we're going to get started here. Let's begin with the code, because there's not much of it today. In fact, there's only one tweak that we're going to do. We're going to do 2 lines total, or I guess 4 lines total if you include the comment and the U property line here. So when you go into your C++ class, you should see that you have, if you followed the last episode, you will have the name of your project. Mine is SSB template, and then character. And you'll have a .h and a .cpp class of each of those. These were the classes where we added the damage counter, the type of character, basically their name. So if you follow that same procedure and search right here, you'll be able to type in your name, which is this. This is the name of my project, and then game mode. This game mode class is basically a child of the base game mode class from Unreal, which I believe is just called game mode. So you can double click on it, open it. That's these right here. It'll have all this in it already except for num players equals 3. That's what we're adding today. And the header file will have all this in it already except for these 3 lines right here. So real quick, what we're doing here is Super Smash Brothers, or games like that. I don't know exactly what you'd call them. Some people call them like Arena Fighter, but I know that can be changed when you talk about, like, some people call Overwatch an Arena Fighter. Totally different game. I wouldn't call it Arena anything. I would just call it like, and in fact, I used to call it like a Battle Royale before PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. So I don't want to get confusing now, because now it sounds like you're talking about Apex Legends or Fortnite or something. But basically, these games where you have a bunch of characters from different genres, different games, whatever, and they're coming together to fight each other. Obviously, they're meant to be fighting games that are based around a lot of combat between multiple players. So you can do AI as well, but I figured it was most important that we got out multiplayer functionality. So we might even hit up online functionality for this tutorial as well down the line. So if you're interested in playing a multiplayer online Super Smash Bros. Game that you make, then we will cover that. But basically, all we're doing today is we're going to add the amount of players you can spawn. So this number right here, I made a variable, which is just an integer, num players. And what it is it's going to be the amount of players that are expected to be in the game. So I'm not going to change it like if someone loses all their lives and gets knocked out, or if someone drops out or anything like that. We will only change it when loading the game. And what I mean by that is when we come from the character select screen, say 4 characters are selected. It's going to be a 4-player game. Now, if 2 characters are selected, we only want 2 characters to spawn in. So this that you see right here, this num players equals 3 in the constructor, we are not going to continue to use that once we get the character select screen in and working. However, without that, there's no real way to tell how many characters you're going to want to spawn. So I figure we just hard code it right in here. So let's go over it. So I just left a comment that says the number of players in a match, which I just left intentionally vague because of the things I said before. And then it's a U property where you can edit it from Blueprint, and I just put category game mode. and then it's just int num players. So it's really simple. That's all the code for today. And then I made it 3 because 3 is actually going to result in 4 players, because if you remember from any of the other episodes we watched, integers start at 0, and in fact all values in programming basically start at 0. So in C++, so num player 0 would actually be 1 player. So every time, whatever number is here, you actually have 1 more than that. So since we have num players equals 3, we actually have 4 players. It's that simple. So make sure to build your project or rebuild it. But if you rebuild it, you're going to need to close Unreal a lot of the time because you'll get errors. So if you get errors and you were trying to do a rebuild, just close your editor, close this guy, and then try it again. But you can just build Visual Studio and hit compile. That way you don't have to close your editor. I've already done this, so I won't have to do it, but there you go. Alrighty, so that was all that there was for programming in this episode. So a lot of it's going to be blueprint related. Now, you might have seen something similar in my fighting game tutorial if you have watched that one, or if you've been keeping up with that. If you haven't and you want to be, I will leave an iCard in the top right now. If you click that, that'll show you the fighting game tutorial that I'm working on, which is more for Street Fighter games and Mortal Kombat games, games like that, instead of like Super Smash Brothers. So there's quite a few differences. The health, the spawns, the amount of players, the way we do attacks and hitboxes. So it's going to be quite different, but if you find that you need any of that functionality for any reason, then go check that out. But if you're already watching the fighting game tutorial, or if you've already watched the episodes in the past, you'll notice that we have done a pretty similar thing here called base game mode BP. So all I did is I have some folders that I set up. You don't have to follow these. Just all you need to do is make sure you make a new blueprint class. And basically this is going to be your blueprint game mode. So we have the C++ class, the SSB template game mode, as you see here. Now that's good. That's a child of the game mode class, of Unreal's default game mode class. So that's good. We're going to want that. However, considering we're using widgets and things like that for the HUD, I'd recommend making your blueprint class, or your game mode that you're going to be spawning initially when you're in the game, your blueprint class game mode. And then you can parent it to this class right here. So your C++ game mode class will be your parent of the blueprint class. And I'll show you what I mean. So if you do add new blueprint class, you'll create this, name it whatever you want. I call it base game mode BP. And then if you go to class settings, you can choose your parent class. And I should show you here. When you do this, it actually gives you the classes you can choose. You can choose game mode base if you want. I'd recommend, like I said, using the C++ one. And it's going to get cut off on the bottom there. But basically all you have to do is type in the name of the game mode. And this is the C++ class. So if I pick this, then this is the parent, and you don't have to change it. But if you accidentally didn't pick that, or you're looking at this later on after you've already made this, then you can change it right here. If you go to class settings, parent class, and reparent it. Okay. So anyway, going back to what I was saying, is if you were watching the fighting game tutorial, you might have seen something very similar to this. That's because we kind of did this. This is quite different than what we did in the fighting game tutorial, and that's because in the fighting game tutorial, you're only going to have 2 players maximum fighting with each other. So they're probably going to be defined player 1 on the left, player 2 on the right. Or you can swap them at your will, you know, if you want player 1 to be on the right for whatever reason, that's fine. But you're only going to really have 2 spawn points. So for that, we didn't really need to do any of the logic for random spawning. Now, the thing is, like, in this case, I spawned up here. If we keep playing this... and I'm getting really unlucky. Okay, so anyway, usually you would spawn at different spots. I think it's because I'm set to be player index 0, which just happens to want to go to player 4 because it's the last one that we spawn. But when they all spawn at the same time, you'll notice that you can actually spawn in very different spots. So this is not always going to be the same spot that you spawn in if you're player 1, for example. Because when you have four player controllers, they're going to be fighting with each other. And what I mean by that is, give me 1 second. Well, yeah, I can't really change it. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. I don't want to get too far ahead, but basically all you need to understand is that the reason this is different from the fighting game tutorial is because we don't want the spawns to be static. You can set up spawn points when you load into the level that you want to spawn at. Like certain players should spawn here. They don't have to be completely random. If they were, then it would be really unfair because you could have someone spawn right next to this guy, for example. And you wouldn't want that. You want them to be spread out a little bit so they at least have a little bit of time to get to each other and plan out their actions. So all I did here is did a regular for loop, the for loop node. So if you get num players, which is the C++ variable that we made here. Another quick note, num players is actually already a thing. So it is a function in the game mode base. Now, you could actually use this, but this is not what we're using it for right now. So don't use this if you call your variable num players. Use the integer, which is the green one right here. Get num players. I realized this after I already made the code. I left it in to show you this on purpose. So be careful if you name it num players, because that's one of the, like, that's the name that my brain jumps to every time I think of this variable. So I'm sure a lot of you are also going to be calling it num players, or like number of players or something like that. Just realize that this get num players, if it's not doing what you want, you might be using this function as opposed to your actual variable. So make sure you get your variable. Just put in a for loop, honestly. And then this is different than the fighting game tutorial too. So you'll realize that I made a function called spawn player. Now, if you want to make a new function, all you have to do is go over here on the left and hit plus function, and that'll make a new one for you. So this is different because if you remember in the fighting game tutorial, I actually made a spawn players function, and I spawned them all at the same time. Again, because we knew that we wanted 2 players. We knew kind of more, the details were going to be a little bit more static. We knew we had certain spawn points for a certain amount of players. In this, I want to spawn the players one thing at a time. That way we can kind of determine where we want them to be. So here's what I did. I spawned the player, and I get all actors of the class player start. So this is get all actors of class right here. Not class with tag, just get all actors of class. And then search for player start. Now, player start is these things right here. So you can see I placed 4 of them around the map. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you already have 1 when you load in, and it should be in the middle down here. So you can move them to wherever you want. All you gotta do is click on it and drag it around with these. So easy. And you can rotate them too. Like for example, mine had to be rotated, if I wanted it facing the right, I had to rotate it to -90 degrees. And if I wanted it facing to the left, I put it to 90 degrees. So I just have these 2 on the left facing the right, and these 2 on the right facing the left. You can do whatever. That does not matter. I just did that because that makes the most sense to me. In this case, you can leave their player start tags out. In the fighting game tutorial, we named them P1, P2, or whatever we ended up calling them. Simply to make it so that, oh, player 1 will spawn here, player 2 will spawn here. If we want the spawns to be random, you don't want to spawn them, you don't want that player start tag to have a tag related to the player that they're going to be. Because if player 1 was, if this was tagged P1, and we always spawn player 1 here, player 1 will always spawn here no matter what. Well, we don't want that. Like, if we, or you might want that. If you don't want that, then ignore that. Don't put a tag in, because you don't, you could have the player 1 spawn at any of these spawn points. So just leave that blank if you want the spawns to be random. If you want player 1 to always spawn on this particular spawn point, then set these tags to be like P1, P2, P3, P4, whatever. and we can work with that in the future. You can look at the fighting game tutorial. Again, I'll link that iCard because that's actually a little bit different. In the top right, there's 2, so they're both spawn point episodes, but you might have to look at them if you're interested in static spawns. And just for the record, you already have a network player spawn up here in the scene. So if you want to make them 4 really quickly, just Control-C, Control-V, copy-paste, or right-click. Oh, it doesn't even look like you can right-click, can you? And copy. So just hit Control-C on your keyboard, Control-V, copy-paste if you don't know that shortcut. And you can just make 4 really quickly. Okay. So, going back to what I was saying, I know I keep getting interrupted, but this one is a little bit more complicated for people who haven't dealt with spawns before. It took me quite a bit to get used to this when I initially did this for Fury Strike. So I want to make sure it's pretty clear what we're doing. So we're looping through, we're getting all actors of class player start. Then, we're going to do for each of these player starts, so just drag off of this array and type for each. Whoops. Then you can do the first one, for each loop. And then drag off the array element and type in player start tag. This one right here, get player start tag. And that's this. Now, if you remember what I said, you could make it P1, P2, P3, P4 if you want it to be static. Since we're doing it random, the way we are going to do it is we're going to just basically, it's going to choose one. It's going to loop through, it'll choose whatever one at random. It's the first one in here is not always going to be the first one in the game. So it's going to basically choose these. It's not random per se, but to us it's random. Like the computer does it and we don't know which one it's going to be. So it's going to loop through the player start tags. Then you can do a not equal to. This right here. So you can do exclamation mark equals for not equal or type in not equal. Not equal to taken. Taken's the name that I am going to set when a player spawns there. The reason we do this is because if it is random, you don't want to necessarily spawn 2 characters on the same spawn point. If our whole point is that they're random and that they're separated, you don't want to spawn 2 players on this spawn point right here. So, since it's none, whoops, since it is currently none, if it's not equal to taken, then do a branch. If it's not equal to taken, spawn the character here. Spawn actor does require a transform, so get the transform of the player start. So just drag off the array element and type get actor transform. Drag it in here. So you're going to spawn your character class, which mine is still the default side scroller character, or you can use your new character like the SSB template character I have, but you probably don't have a mesh tied to that, so it'll be invisible if you choose that. And what I mean is, we can use my SSB template character. It's a functioning character, but it's got no mesh on it. So all the characters that spawn are going to be invisible. So if you haven't tied anything to that, then just use your side scroller character. And then, this part is going to be changed out next episode. So understand this is not the best way to do this, but it's the easiest way to understand it with what we have. So get player controller, player index 0 just gets the first player controller. If you're using your keyboard, that's going to be you. So you just get player controller. It's this one right here. And then you're going to call a function possess off of that. Possess takes control of a pawn, basically. So what happens is you take the controller that you have. In our case, it's get player controller 0. And so that's the keyboard in this case. The keyboard is now going to be controlling the pawn. The pawn is what we just spawned here. We spawned this actor. We spawned this character. So this controller, the keyboard, is going to control this actor we just spawned. And you'll see that happen right here. We spawned here, so now we control here. Easy, right? And you'll see we don't have control over any of the other characters at the moment. Okay. Then, once we've successfully spawned and possessed the pawn, what we want to do is set the player start tag. And yes, it's the same one that we checked if it's not taken. Just drag off the array element. Set it to taken. This means that when this spawn player function gets called again, because remember, this is in a loop, it's going to go through here. It'll find the same player start that we already spawned them at. But it'll say taken this time, so this case will fail out and it will spawn them at a different spawn point. So hopefully that makes sense. That makes it so this code right here spawns the players, gives you control of them, and in the next episode we'll make it so it gives you control for all the players that are in here. So if we have 4 players, 4 different controllers or input devices will have control. And then it sets the spawn as taken so that players don't spawn there again. Okay, so that's pretty simple stuff. Once, you know, it's explained like that. So, sometimes a little bit confusing to think about, but should be pretty good now. And you can move these spawns to wherever you want. The last thing I'm going to add there is that this is what I was talking about earlier about why I keep spawning here. So the reason I actually keep spawning here is because of this thing we're doing that I just mentioned was not that great. This player controller 0, since it's basically putting the player controller at the, or it's always using the keyboard as the player controller, it's always going to take control of the last one it possesses, which is that one. So that's the issue here. If we didn't do it with player controller 0, you could see us, we could play it, and we would actually spawn elsewhere, but now we're just going to spawn here. But this notice that this will actually be random when we get our player controllers in. So don't be confused by that. It's just kind of a limitation of what we have in our code right now. So don't worry about the fact that it's not random, okay? So lastly, I just wanted to get us set up. This is not necessarily tied to the spawning itself, but I did want to get us set up for the character HUD, since next episode we will be getting the characters being able to be controlled by 4 different controllers, and we will be able to spawn in random spots. I wanted to make sure we could actually see the HUD that has all 4 characters on it. So right now you can see it's actually working, but nothing's being filled out, and that's because we're going to be using the get player character node with these different indices 1, 2, and 3. Or where'd 4 go for that? That was weird. I don't know where the damage counter went. Here it is. It's all the way over here for some reason. And 3. So remember encoding 0 is 1 in C++. So you'll see in the last episode when we were making the HUD, get player character, player index 0 exists here. That's for player 1. So for player 2, you use 1. Player 3, you use 2. And player 4, you use 3. But just a few things I wanted to add to get you set up. So we already made one of these last time. I made them smaller and split them up so we could have 4 different ones. You could definitely make them smaller and fit 8, or if you wanted to, you could go as many characters as you could fit, really. 4 is probably a good number. 8 also a good number, but that's a lot. So either way, you can do whatever. I just separated them by player 1, 2, 3, and 4. Simple stuff. In the last episode, you saw how to bind these things. You just click on here and create a binding. Well, you're going to do the exact same thing for all of these. So you'll see I have the exact same bindings for all these, except for, except for what we just talked about. The player you can copy it from, for example, the damage counter. If we go to damage counter 2, you can copy it right from the first one. Just make sure you change the player character, player index to 1 for player 2. And then I made a separate variable for the damage counter string. You see I have 1 for each player. You don't need to do this. You actually could do it with 1, or without saving it out, and just bind it to this object. So bind it and then don't make this variable and just append to the text box. You could definitely do that. I'm saving it out because we're going to potentially use that down the line for, we'll probably change the color of the text. Right now it's red. It'll probably be like a white as it is now, or excuse me, right now it's white. It'll probably be white as it starts and then go to red or something down the line as you take more damage. So I save these out to a variable. That way we can end up changing other things based on them. Like we could make the text bigger as you get more damage. We could change its color as you get more damage, things like that. Okay, guys. I mean, basically that's it. In the next episode, we are going to be going over what I talked about, which is using the proper player controller, player character setup. That way we can have 4 characters along the bottom here. You'll be able to see the images, percents, and names, and they'll be different for players 1 through 4. We'll be able to have the actual random spawning, which isn't happening now just because it's always player index 0. So you'll be able to see that in action, even though the functionality is pretty much there. And lastly, you'll be able to choose how many players there are, and we'll change the HUD with that. So, for example, if you end up choosing only 2 player characters, then, or, you know, if you set num players to 2, we'll make sure that not all 4 boxes pop up. Only 2 boxes will pop up. So we'll make sure that the HUD matches how many players are actually in-game. That's what I want to cover in the next episode. And then, if you guys like this video, please subscribe. It helps me more than seriously anything else you could do. And more importantly, it shows me that you're interested in this type of content so that I can make more and continue working on the series. If you subscribe, then I know, hey, you guys really like the Super Smash Brothers series, so I'll put out more videos related to that. Feel free to comment any questions you have. You can join the Discord as well. It's in the description. I can't link it to an iCard because YouTube doesn't let you do that, or at least I haven't found a way to let you do that. But if you join the Discord, I can help you with pictures and images, or excuse me, pictures and videos if I have to, about different tutorial aspects and what I would do to solve an issue for specific questions you have, things like that. And I think that's about it, guys, honestly. So, yeah. Just comment down below whatever it is that you want to see me do in the next episode. And any questions that you have or any issues you had while following this tutorial. And next week we'll be doing the 3rd-person tutorial. So we're going to do fighting game, Super Smash Brothers, and 3rd-person tutorial. Anyway, guys, I hope you're excited. Thanks for watching my video the whole way through and supporting me. I appreciate it so much, guys. I'm Shawnthebro. I'll see you in the next one.